for a lot of people, it's a complicated relationship with the church and with their faith. And music is a place where you can meet in the middle and know that God is speaking in all of it in ways sometimes that are very surprising.
Hello, and welcome to Working with me, Dan Doriani, hosting a podcast where we explore faith, work, culture, and the way believers can make a difference in their corner of the world. My guest today is Sandra McCracken, singer and songwriter based in Nashville. She's known for her many solo albums and also for compositions of music for churches and for children, often based on the Psalms. She's also a columnist with Christianity Today. My guest today is Sandra McCracken, singer and songwriter based in Nashville. She's known for her many solo albums, for her compositions alone and with all kind of collaborators. She does work for the congregation, for the church, with the Gettys. She's given us some wonderful songs based on the Psalms, and she's recently become a columnist for Christianity Today. The column is called Pending Resolution. It is so good to have you here, Sandra.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you and just appreciate your work and being able to get to spend some time together today.
Yeah. So you're a writer, obviously. You've written about 15 albums, some EPs. You've worked with a children's group. You've done Rain for Roots, Indelible Grace. I mean, you have a wide range of interests and have written solo and with teams. Can you just tell us a little bit about the creative process? Do songs just pour out of you, or is it toil? What's it like?
Maybe both. I guess it relates to other forms of work in the sense that it's always a little bit of both. The thing that we're made to do or called to do, there's an element of joy and you love doing it. And then there's also a place where there's resistance in the work. So I've seen some days it feels like more like one than the other. And over the long story, you start to see, like you're saying, a lifetime of these different recordings that have taken place over many years.
Yeah. So can I just ask if it works this way? Maybe you get an idea for a song and maybe 2/3 of it is written, just the chords and most of the lyrics, and then you just get stuck. That the pain is, how do I get over this problem in this moment, this transition, this lyric that just doesn't work and won't work? What's it? Yeah. Is that a guess that's right or wrong?
That's a good question. There is inevitably a moment where you get stuck, and it doesn't always happen, but I think as much as possible to try not to think too much about being stuck. I think that's the most helpful thing for me, is just keep pushing. And that might mean starting or picking up some other thing at the same time or next to that place, where just keeping the energy going. And
yes,
that's true both in when I work by myself or when I work with other people. It's just trying to keep it light and not worry about the fact that you might be stuck in the moment.
Yes. So my mind goes a couple different directions. Sometimes when I'm stuck working on maybe an article or a book or a sermon or something, I'll go out and pull weeds, or I'll maybe do push-ups or something, or wash dishes. Right. But other times I just keep on writing because I know that if I write enough bad stuff, eventually something good might come out of me.
Yeah.
Does that sound right to you or not?
I think that's really good. And I've learned about some of this process just from journaling. And when you're journaling and you just write and put pen to paper, whether that's first thing in the morning or before you pick up your phone, I think for me that feels like the exercise where there's nobody looking over your shoulder, there's no grade, there's no red liner yet. You just can be unfiltered in what you put on the page. I think you're right. That's almost like the word version of pulling weeds. If you just let yourself go and just start seeing what comes into view to get unstuck. But it's good. And the three things you mentioned are all physical things, which is interesting. Like doing something that's not heady or in your mind, but remembering, we have a body and we can get out and do something and take a deep breath or be outside.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks. So what I'm hearing is that you're not the kind of musician that waits for a moment of inspiration necessarily. There's some poets who say, to pick another creative activity, I'll write when the muse strikes. And there's others who say, I'm going to write a poem before 10 a.m. every day.
Yeah.
And I'm going to write a song every day before noon, no matter how bad it is, there'll be something good or interesting that I might find. Which style is yours?
Good question. I'm probably more, I do look for the inspiration and look for the spark. And I'm there's an element of discipline, but obviously life gets so busy and you're doing a lot of other things. And I'm a mom of 3 kids. And so
Yes.
a lot of it for me depends on capturing that moment of inspiration, whether that's jotting it down in a portable notebook or a voice recorder or something. I don't know if you do that with ideas, but it's like they're going to happen in moments you're like, oh, wait, I got to remember that.
Yes, absolutely. So do you sing the notes into a recorder right away? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if I can find, I think a lot of the smartphones will have a feature like that.
Yes.
And it doesn't even have to sound good, but it's amazing how much I can forget. And I think, oh, I wouldn't forget that. And then I do. I can't remember
Yes.
that melody or that phrase or whatever that is that was kind of sparking for me at the time.
Yeah, that used to happen to me all the time when I was running. I'm terrible at wrapping things up, like writing conclusions.
Oh, yeah.
And then I would think of them while I was running. I'll remember this by the time I'm home. No. And I began taking paper with me and a pen sometimes just
That's
to capture
good.
things. Yeah. So you're the antithesis. There's other ways to do it. Like, maybe a lot of people maybe you saw the Let It Be
Yeah.
show about the Beatles who came in. It's almost like they said, oh, we've got to write 10 songs.
Yeah.
And we have almost no ideas or preparation. That doesn't sound like you.
I do. Well, so they've got the benefit of collaboration.
Right,
They're
right.
bringing these 4, I mean, I guess 5 if you consider George, but just all these minds together to do this thing, which is, I guess, an example of more ideas means better ideas. Do you find that to be true?
Oh, yeah. And especially having somebody come by and tell you, that seems like almost a good idea, but you need to work on that some more.
Yeah.
We're not quite there yet.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So lately you've been writing for the church more, and I have to say I really like your psalms for the church.
Thank you.
We sing them at my church sometimes. And then the idea of a children's collective. Tell me what's fueling your interest in those things lately.
Those 2 things go together, I think, for me, learning about writing for children, trying to write or sing songs for my own children, and then writing for the church and for a congregation. As I look back over the years of being a songwriter, it started out when I was very young, and I wrote songs that were just telling how I feel in a moment and very self-expressive. But then they became more and more, my interest shifted from just wanting to say how I feel to wanting to share that. And so children's songs and congregational songs have both been a way of like opening up to how can these songs be shared and how do we sing these together, which means melodies have to be simpler, style has to, you don't want something so tricky that no one can follow what you're doing.
Yes.
So that's been both of those projects, the Rain for Roots Children's Project and leading at church, of course, like just the practice of worship leading does sharpen your your mind to think about hospitality and church music and hymns. Those are all, I've been in the school of hymns for a long time. So,
and of course, a good children's song is of interest to adults as well. May I just ask, your children are of an age? Did they prompt this? Your children getting old enough to sing?
Yes.
Well.
Yeah. So I think together with this collective of friends and in our community, we were talking as young moms and dads about what it is we talked about, honestly, all those camp songs you get in your head and you can't get them out. And then you think, well, some of them are great, but what if we actually wrote some songs that you want to get stuck in your head? And that was really the goal, was to take these songs, scripture songs that would really be tucked into our hearts, both kids and adults, and then to try to record them in a way that you didn't mind if they were played many times over. Because that's not always the case with children's music.
You wouldn't hate your own song. So just for example, we were still singing Deep and Wide when I was a child, as if it's a Christian song. There's nothing about Jesus or anything. There's a fountain flowing deep and wide. You could sing that about any body of water with a fountain in it in the world. We Will Feast in the House of Zion has a little more substance to it. And kids can sing it, I think.
Wow. It was, I've studied hymns a lot in intentional ways, and in some ways just by sitting in church when I was little and reading the hymnal, because I enjoyed the poetry and liked to kind of get lost in that. But by the time I wrote We Will Feast, hymns were so much a part of my musical language that I think that became sort of a hymn almost by accident, but it was shaped after the hymns. And it's on the Psalms album, but the text was really closely tied to Isaiah as well. Just this vision of what will be, and singing ourselves forward into that is so important, because there's so many days we don't really have a vision for what might be. We're just kind of stuck.
Singing ourselves forward. That sounds like letting the eschatological side of our faith inform the present. Is that what you mean?
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So can we roll through some of those songs a little bit, and I'll ask for comments.
Okay.
Some particular songs.
All right.
So first of all, I've listened to your music a fair amount, and I've listened to some songs over and over again, but I noticed that some of them are kind of lo-fi, and some are hi-fi and glossy, almost chimey. So Thy Mercy, My God is the theme of my song. That's pretty lo-fi. I don't expect you to remember everything, because maybe you recorded it different ways. You know, it's like a banjo and recorders, and the piano's like way back, almost in a cave, kind of that way back, the back of the room kind of sound. But then in the valley, Bless the Lord is very glossy and chiming and shiny and bright and very,
with City of Light. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pop song. You could play it anywhere.
Oh, that is very observant, because the first one you mentioned, Thy Mercy, was recorded. It was the first year that I had any kind of home recording studio gear. So you are very much hearing what that was like. And it was prior to that, I'd always been in a studio. You're paying for studio time. You have a producer. You have all the people ready to go. You got like 2 hours. You better get it right. And so this was the beginning of a time where you could capture a moment and then record it right then, and then build on that and take your time with it. So I think you're hearing that accurately in there. You're hearing a lot. And then Bless the Lord is with City of Light, and that's it's a different producer. Ben Shive worked on that, and I believe it was Ben Shive. We worked on some of that here, and then they have some musicians in Australia. So that was literally done across 2 continents.
Wow.
So that's also kind of amazing, because technology has changed so much in that time. So I'm glad to hear that it translates, because you can still do so much genuine collaboration, but with technology these days that you couldn't do before.
Do you know the song Blind Willie McTell by Bob Dylan? Do you know that song?
Well,
by any chance?
I do know it by name. I couldn't sing it for you. But
yeah, that's fine. I wasn't going to ask you to sing it for me.
I'm a big Dylan fan. I know. I just thought I should authentically answer that, because I don't think I could call the tune to mind right now. But
so it's the main idea is it was never polished. It was never completed. It's now considered one of his top 3 or 4 or 5 songs of all time. But it's just him and Mark Knopfler, and with a very lo-fi recording and nothing else. Just a 12-string guitar and Dylan banging on his piano, singing, wailing, really.
Amazing.
But it's a great song.
I'm going to have to look it up as soon as we're done, because I'm a fan of both of those artists. And I tend to like that lo-fi production, because you do feel like you're getting to hear something that's happening that's spontaneous.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your influences for a second. You mentioned people, since you mentioned that, you say Joni Mitchell, of course, Tom Petty. Everybody likes Tom Petty. Emmylou Harris. But then I'm just amazed that you have your partners, your collaborators, are David Ramirez, Colin Hay, Liz Weiss. Liz Weiss is awesome. I discovered her all by myself. I had no idea she was a Christian. But Colin Hay and David Ramirez, what's the story with those two?
Yeah. Well, again, we get to work together with people that are not in your city, not in the same room, and they're just so. It's just made me more courageous about asking. So obviously, I'm a fan of both of their work. Colin Hay for many years with Men at Work, and he was so receptive to the invitation to ask him. And it was that specific song. I was singing a Dylan song and really wanted to have him join, and I think it resonated for him as well. And I mean, hearing his voice on it was just, so we were not in the same room when we were recording it, but we got to interact just long distance.
Mhm.
And so that's how that came about. That was also one of the gifts of COVID this is when I started I was working on a covers album, and then it was just a great time to just call people because everybody was at home.
Yeah.
So
So
David
can I
Ramirez
we
too.
don't emphasize too much that everybody has to be a believer to work together by any means, but are they believers? Are Ramirez and Colin Hay believers, or just
Um,
people you want to collaborate with? You like their voice?
yeah, I don't know that I could say for sure
Yeah.
where they are with their faith. I know David and I did a podcast interview not long ago, and he has a lot of background in the church. He did an album called Backsliders, which is all these old hymns, and it's very haunting and beautiful. But I know I mean, for a lot of people, it's a complicated relationship with the church and with their faith. And
Yeah.
music is a place where you can meet in the middle and know that God is speaking in all of it in ways sometimes that are very surprising.
After the break, Sandra will explain why songwriters record and reinterpret other people's songs and how they go about doing that.
The Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals is a coalition of believers who hold the historic creeds and confessions of the Reformed faith and proclaim biblical doctrine in order to foster a Reformed awakening in today's church. What all that means is we care about the church, we care about truth, and work hard to preserve and advance it every day. Connect with our broadcast, podcast, publishing, internet, and event platforms at workingwithdan.org. Thank you for your prayerful and financial support of the Alliance.
Well, we're talking about secular folks. You know this. You know I wanted to talk to you about REM. Even on the way over to this
Are you
interview,
an REM fan?
I listened to your version and their version one more time driving over for this interview. And you could feel free to tell me that I'm wrong, but you've been writing for years, but you sometimes cover other people's songs. I mean, it's not common, but you do it sometimes. You have an album that's that genre. And it just struck me that maybe your face shows up the way you sing that song, because Everybody Hurts by REM it's a fantastic song. And, they wrote some amazing songs. End of the World as We Know It. I mean, who else could write that but them? But Everybody Hurts is not their style. And just for our listeners, it starts off with two guitars, a light bass, arpeggios, keyboards, minimal percussion. And then it kind of gets orchestral and big power chords, and it gets kind of harsh and defiant, which seems to me to flow out of their, I'll say, nihilism or apparent nihilism. But then your version is just softer and gentler. You sound, your voice almost mimics theirs, and you sound great. And
Thank you.
but then
Well,
it
yeah.
gets softer, and throughout, your piano more prominent and gentle strings and a gentle bass, and it just seems gentler. To me, it seemed like I'm singing the same words, but with more hope and gentleness.
Yeah.
So tell me if I interpreted it right or wrong. I don't mind if you tell me I'm wrong, but I thought your faith was shining through a little bit, even though the words were the same.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. And there is no wrong way to respond to it. And it means a lot to me that you pay attention, that you took the time to listen that carefully to it. And I think sometimes we take in music and it hits at a deeper level. We're not even thinking about it. But sometimes, so that song, the timing of recording that song, even though REM had been a band I listened to in high school with just friends, just socially,
Right.
that song came back full circle. And actually, I don't know if you know Paul Lim, but he sometimes guest preaches. He teaches here in Nashville at Vanderbilt, and he mentioned it. And I hadn't thought of that song in such a long time. And he mentioned it in a sermon, and he was talking about this deep human ache. And I told him after church, I was like, well, I'm doing a covers record, so it's your fault, but I'm going to go record that song. And so I have to give thanks to Paul Lim for just for putting that in front of me again at just the right moment. But I do think we were just coming out of this pandemic life and just this intense polarization in our culture and in our churches. There were a few songs on that album. That one is one, and U2's song One. Those two songs that really speak about how we are all longing for things to be made right between us. And we don't have the power to do it without some divine influence. And yet we have the reconciler, capital R, who is what that would be my hope is that is what is resonating in the middle of my voice and being able to sing that he would continue to do this work, because we certainly need more grace to be able to work out our differences and leave in these places of conflict.
Yeah, I think you just label it. What I heard in your voice was hope more than in their voice. I'm not trying to be critical of them. I mean, that their song is their song, and they can sing it, however they want. And it's powerful the way it is, almost with despair. But you voice the despair, but you say the words that declare despair, but your voice says, but there's hope. That's what I experienced anyway.
That's an encouragement to hear that. I think the Psalms are the place where I hear over and over again that we have permission to lament, and we also have a great hope that keeps us from staying in the lament, like we're moving through it.
Yes.
And so I don't know how, there's a lot of mystery to that, where even for people that are not in creative work like singing or the vulnerability of singing, there's also an element that God's doing that in all kinds of work, and in the places where he places us, that it makes me think about that, where somehow when we read the Psalms, and when I've read the Psalms, it changes how I sing. And I think it changes how we work and how we live by the power of his Spirit and his word. And so when you can hear it back, or when somebody comments on it, I'm so grateful that God is touches our lives in that way.
Yes. Yeah, but you also make an interesting point. I do want to transition to the Psalms, but it's not just singers and songwriters and poets and public speakers who put themselves out there. I mean, a chef will do that when they're creating a new menu. And I mean, they're somewhat angst-laden. But will people like the new direction? Will I lose customers? Will they? Because there is such a thing as a dish that seems good to the chef, but not to the customer.
That's so true, because taste and how everybody responds to it, and
right.
And why does it look like that? I mean, there's so many ways you can respond.
Why is there so much tofu in this? What are you thinking?
There's all this white space on the plate. I don't understand. There's the smallest thing.
Right. Hey, let's talk about the Psalms a little, since, lament, of course, there's a good place for that. I have listed, a number of songs that are used widely from your series, and We Will Feast in the House of Zion, maybe your most widely used song, I don't know. But In the Valley, Bless the Lord, Send Out Your Light from Psalm 43. I found My Soul Finds Rest, Psalm 62, I Will Not Be Shaken, to be I really want to ask you about it, because I know you're trying to make songs that are singable, but there's some pretty high notes in that. I'm not being critical, I'm just naming it. There's some pretty high notes in that song, and some of your songs are very much sing-along. That one isn't as much a sing-along. I'm sure you knew that.
That's right.
And you said, I'm going to produce this song anyway because I like it, and Psalm 62 is powerful, which it certainly is. And, maybe you just wanted to go a different direction for whatever reason. Could you just talk us through writing very singable music, and then maybe music that stretches the congregation a little bit? Or just take that any way you want to go. I just want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that song. We've been opening the performances recently. The band and I have been playing that one first, and it is, it starts out, and it does have kind of high notes even for me, and so there's a little frailty to that, which I kind of like, putting that right in the front of the night of music. And then once you get to the bridge, that part is actually very singable. So people can sing, I sing praise to you, and people can join at that point. So you're kind of warming up into this experience of sharing music together. When I put it on an album, it was in a batch of songs that were written. And when I wrote it, it was a very personal, kind of like a journal entry. It was one that I just wrote and wasn't thinking as much about congregational music at that moment. But I was wrestling with and praying through the idea of home and what is home, to find our ultimate rest and belonging in the Lord, even when all of your other circumstances or your address might change. Or sometimes you plan that and you make a move. Other times something will happen and you had no control over the circumstances, and you end up having to take a different job or do a different thing. So it was really a very personal reflection, which is why it's harder for a congregation to sing it first.
Yeah.
And then it goes together with some others that have been more intentionally for the congregation. But It's one I've been singing again recently, and I think that song calls me back to center or north or home.
Well, I mean, I really like the song, and I'll be very clear about that. The fact that
Thank
it's
you.
not easy for everybody to sing
Yeah.
doesn't, assess the value of the song. But it is a song. It's just kind of song you read to people in the hospital, and then, but then there's hope, very strong hope, even bold confidence at the end. And it reminds me of the need to be willing to, kind of wait for the resolution of, that's your commentary, that's your column with Christianity Today. It works to agonize almost to a resolution. Do you know who Sam Amidon is?
I don't.
Okay. So he's got a very frail voice. I mean, he can sing well if he wants to, but he's got a very frail voice. Bonnie Prince Billy, you know him? I'm assuming.
I do. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, his voice is just awful. A lot of times he warbles and makes you wait for the resolution, but when you
That's a
get it,
great
it's
way
so
to say that.
powerful.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I thought you were doing that a little bit for us in that song.
Oh, thank you. That's a lot of what happens in music. It's like Morse code is what's happening in between and how long and how much tension you build and how you release it. And there can be there's something about that where at first you think, oh, I just want everything to sound really perfect. But then over time, I've come to enjoy, and singers like you just mentioned, Bonnie Prince Billy, where there's this primal expression that you're hearing. And I'm really drawn to that. And even if it's not perfect or tuned perfectly, there is something very human about it that helps us to connect to one another.
Can I just back you up?
Yes.
So you like it when
Yeah.
things aren't tuned perfectly sometimes?
I do.
Like
100%.
that the string, that a string is sharp or flat, and you think you like that sometimes.
That's a great question. You could definitely go down a rabbit hole with this because I don't think you want it to be distracting. And
Yes.
it's like the chef example. Some people are going to have an aversion. They're not going to like everything you chose to keep or to re-sing. But I do think maintaining some of that element of having a little mistake or having something that happens, like the Dylan records, when his guitar, he's got his sleeve on, like his he has his shirt with probably a button on the sleeve, and you
Yes.
hear it in his strumming, or he laughs in the beginning and he's telling a
Yes.
joke, and you're just like, I feel like I'm in the room. So
Right.
I like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, let me move to one more kind of type of question, and then we'll do our lightning round, if that's okay.
Okay.
So the type of question is, some musicians, song after song, album after album, sounds similar,
Okay.
and others very different. So I gave you on my little summary, I just kind of prepared something like the movie scores of Hans Zimmer. I don't know if you pay attention to movie scores. And Alexander Desplat, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. You would have no idea that the same person wrote the scores for different music, for different movies. But if you read if you are in a Martin Phipps scored, everything he writes is kind of the same. I'm that's not a criticism. It's very interesting and beautiful. And Thomas Newman, he did like The Road to Perdition, a very haunting score. But all of his work has that sort of haunting, and he quotes himself a lot, kind of like Bach and Haydn used to do. And then in the jazz, I don't know if you know who Tord Gustafsson is, but all of his stuff sounds the same, but it's all awesome. And then Brad Maldau, I don't know if you know who he is.
Yes, big fan.
His pieces sound very different from each other.
Yeah.
While all being jazz. So I just want you to comment on, you're in the relatively more variable camp, I think. You're not highly variable. I mean, you don't do punk rock or, headbang or anything. But what do you like in terms of variability? What keeps you going as a musician and a composer?
Well, good question. Well, I'm going to borrow from I just had a conversation with Brett Lott, who's a writer, literary guy, and he teaches at the University of Charleston, but he's a prolific author, has written for a long time, and he learned from a mentor early on, James Baldwin, that this idea of continuing, like never do the same thing twice, like that once you do a thing, once you feel like you have lived it and accomplished it and put it forward as a writer, then you should move on to the next thing and keep stretching yourself. And I love that idea. And I think there's one of the goals for me is probably just that my music wouldn't seem in the moment, that there would be an element of timelessness to it. But at the same time, I'd love for it to just be playful, like an element of play that goes along with that. So you're not just thinking, I mean, let's be honest, like we are like grass, and we will like one day be gone, and then the Lord's going to still get glory for what he does. So you want to write the song that's going to be sung in 100 years,
Yes.
but inherently, but then at the same time, you're like, there can be a levity of saying like, hey, but it's all right. We can just try something today that we've never tried.
Yes.
We can reverse either the strings on the guitar, or do something, that's a terrible example, but do something experimental with the sounds that you're making, and just try it and see what happens. So
well,
I do
alternate
love
tunings
that.
on a guitar, maybe.
Yeah,
just
there
see
you
how
go.
it sounds, right?
That is exactly right. I mean,
Yeah.
really. Yeah, so the creative part, just letting your mind continue to play and get in the sandbox.
Well, we're time bound. We're creatures bound to a place and a time, and we want to be timeless, as you say. But I mean, probably most of us serve our own generation
Yeah,
more than any future generation.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Well, you serve this generation very well, if I may say so. Thank you.
Thank you.
For all of your work. I do have some lightning round questions. You're
Okay.
supposed to answer them in 30 seconds or less. What do you think?
I'll try.
All right, number one, what would you like to have achieved in 5 years?
I would like to continue to work to sing as much as possible. I would love to sing as much as possible, because
So
I
you'd
just
like
realized,
to keep doing what you're doing. That's great. I love
Yeah.
that answer. What is the best piece of advice you ever received?
keep the TV off and wear comfortable shoes. That's my oldest brother, by the way.
Okay, that's good. Well, he sounds like he's got some good ideas. If you could be remembered for any contribution to the world of music, what would it be?
Man, if there's anything I could sing or say that would help somebody see the beauty of God's love for us, like just to really be captured by it. It's something about truth and beauty, like that we would see him for who he is.
I like it. Thank you. If logistics were no object, what would you do for 1 year?
I would love to be near the ocean, and someplace with a good coffee shop and lots of people around, maybe like a city near the ocean where you could just pay attention and see it and take it in and write about it. Yeah.
I like
So
it.
just the slowness of it, just being able to sit and take it in.
An aspiring songwriter hops onto the elevator from the first to the 40th floor, and they say, "Wait a second, are you Sandra McCracken? I'm an aspiring singer-songwriter. What advice do you have for me before we reach the 40th floor?" What would you say?
That's a long ride in an elevator, depending on how slow the
stops.
elevator is. No
It's-
stops.
no
So it's
stops.
fast.
Pretty
Okay.
fast, yeah.
Find your true voice.
That sounds kind of like follow your heart. You don't mean that,
It
do
does
you?
a little bit. No, I don't mean that. All of a sudden, I'm seeing the Titanic, and there's like, but the difference between trying to do something you think someone else thinks you should do versus being able to take off the filters that you are mimicking other things and just try to find that really true sense of what you bring to the world,
Yeah,
because everybody has that. Yeah.
No, I love your answer.
I'm
I
glad.
was worried
Sorry.
about you for a
I
minute.
really appreciate you stopping me and not leaving it with that.
Okay, what's your greatest joy this year? That's the last question.
My family. Yeah. It's been a hard year, honestly. And it just sometimes when you go through hard stuff, I think for me, it's like you just realize more and more how deeply, what a gift it is to be bound up in life together with these people. And there's something happening there that wouldn't happen any other way. And sometimes that means we get in arguments, we work it out, whatever the things that are going on. It's like, what a gift to get to do this.
That's a great answer. Sandra, you've given me a bucket full of good answers and
Thank you.
interesting comments. I have to say, this has been very enlightening, and I love your gentle spirit, your positive spirit, and
Thank you.
and I love your music and your approach to writing music. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for making time to do this. I appreciate you so much.
We're thankful for today's guest and also extend special thanks to our sponsor, the Alliance for Confessing Evangelicals. Please check out their site, Reformation 21. That's the principal host of this podcast. If you want to put your faith to work and change your corner of the world, visit our website, the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. Look for faithandworkstl.org. That's one word. We'll help you start a cohort with like-minded believers who also want to practice their faith at work. This podcast is donor-supported. To keep us going, please donate on our website. Maybe more importantly, you can support us by listening, by subscribing, by sharing, by liking us, by posting us on your favorite platform, or go old school and tell a friend.